Welcome back, everyone, to Kaiserreich Progress Report time. And this time we're going to be taking a look at the KMT in the China rework. Now, there's two progress reports that deal with this. One of them was released 4 months ago, 86 China's left. And the other one has been released just yesterday, which is why I'm actually doing this right now, is because we can actually take a look at the this is only like a big old like exposition dump, and in this one, however, we can take a look at, for example, gameplay and focuses. So yeah, now it is worth actually talking about this because we have more information. Anyway, left KMT. Now let's first get into introductions. Now, they start off in this area, which is in the southeast of China. Let's see if I can actually bring up. No, that's just the full tree. I wish there was a bit of a better picture, but whatever. Basically, this is. Let's actually just bring up Google Maps. Fujian. It's this place. So they start around here. There's a lot of mountains around here. Now, who the fuck are they? Now, the KMT is the party that ruled China in our timeline since, well, let's just say 1927 to 1949. And it was split between two main factions, leftist and rightist, for most of its existence. Well, rather, really until it actually took over in 1927. And the party had existed since basically the turn of the century, but especially since 1911, when the monarchy, the Qing dynasty, had fallen. Until 1927, there was this left-right split. And after that, in our timeline, Chiang Kai-shek and the military leadership led the more right-wing sort of elements to suppress the left wing, although, well, it could be argued that that was just really the military taking over rather than anything else, but it's just complicated, so we're not going to get into it. Anyway, so what happens in Kaiserreich? In Kaiserreich, the major point of departure is obviously that the World War I is won by the Germans instead of the Allies. And that has a couple of important repercussions on China, especially when it comes to who has influence where. So, in real life, Germany did have some influence on China. They had colonies, for example, the city of Qingdao over here, but they were never like that big of a player. It was always mostly France and Britain. So this upsurge of German influence changes things around quite a bit when it comes to the Beijing government. In our timeline, the Qing dynasty fell and then it never came back. It was replaced by the instability of the warlord period, and while de jure, by law, China was a republic, the Beiyang regime, the northern warlords period, up until the 1927, while the KMT, which was, the main instigator of the revolution against the Qing, but not the reason why they fell. The reason why they fell was that the military defected. Basically was forced into the opposition and then it was banned, it went underground, and it had to sort of repair south of the country. So the main KMT bases were in the province of Yunnan over here and in Guangdong. The main KMT strongholds, we could say. Where we can see, near the end of the developing World War I, Sun Yat-sen, who was the founder of the party, started a process of building a rival government to the Beiyang warlords in Guangzhou, or Canton, with uneasy alliances made between local warlords such as Chen Jiuming, who is, if you recall, the federalist guy. The relative isolation of China during the Weltkrieg ended with terms of German-Japanese peace negotiations and the spread of syndicalist propaganda. So that's the other different part. It's not only that Germany wins, but also that the Soviet Union never comes about. Now, in real life, the Soviet Union was very important to the development of the Chinese nationalists. Under something called the First United Front, also known as the KMT-CPC alliance, which was a part of a wider alliance between the newly birthed Soviet Union and the Chinese nationalists. So what the Soviet Union wanted to do was to spread world revolution. And after that failed in igniting revolutions in Germany, aka bringing the socialist revolution to Europe, it decided that the only thing it could do is incite nationalist revolution in Asia. And the KMT, obviously, with China being the biggest country in Asia, and China being the biggest victim of foreign imperialism, the KMT, being the nationalists of China, were the primary, allies in that struggle. The objective was to promote capitalism in Asia so that then Asia could go to socialism, which is, how that kind of stuff is supposed to work. But that was just a kind of long-term thing. Under this alliance, they, in China, there was the promotion of, Soviet, sort of pro-Comintern communist influence, and the Communist Party of China was born from that in 1921, 98 years ago, and it immediately entered into a sort of national revolutionary alliance with the Kuomintang, the KMT, the Nationalists. And the Bolsheviks sort of helped the KMT develop its own party structure. And as a result, the KMT became this definitely nationalist and democratic party, but with a structure that was much, much more alike communist and, Bolshevik parties. So it was kind of a weird mix. And later on, when Chiang Kai-shek took over and started to introduce a lot more right-wing policies, especially in the 1927-37 period, which is known as the Nanjing Decade, it was kind of this weird, almost fascist ideology that they had. They had something called the New Life Movement, which was focused on like China's traditional values being reborn or whatever. So it was kind of like this weird Nazbol thing. But in this timeline, there isn't that. There is the syndicalist revolution, but from the sort of progress report that we're going into and looking, it seems clear that they still have this kind of democratic centralist is the term structure. Why? Well, one particular influence on the development of the KMT were the experiences of those who saw firsthand the formation of the Commune, the French Commune. Most of the eyewitnesses to the syndicalist revolution were members of the Chinese Labor Corps, abandoned in northern France after the armistice. Now, the Chinese Labor Corps was this sort of construction corps, sort of semi-voluntarily recruited corps to send to the Western powers in World War I. Now, in real life, and presumably in Kaiserreich as well, the Chinese government, the warlord, quote-unquote, regime, decided to join the Allies, which created a friction because in the Allies was also Japan, and Japan had already done most of the fighting in Asia. They had taken, Qingdao, they had taken a bunch of German islands all over. So there wasn't really much for China to actually do and fight. They did, recruit an army, and they were planning on sending it, but it never materialized. What did materialize was the Chinese Labor Corps, and they sent a bunch of these guys off to both Russia, out here, and to France to sort of do a bunch of labor. And it was not fun to be involved there. Not fun at all. And this whole, shunning of China and, this sort of attitude that the Allies had and the alliance with Japan, especially in Versailles in 1919, really, really reinforced the perception among many Chinese intellectuals and, political thinkers that the Western democracies, quote-unquote, were really just imperialist powers, and that their model was not the one that should be followed in order to strengthen up China, not just because China is different from France, but also because in the world stage at that point, the Western powers were not really friends of China at all. Again, partially because they just allowed Japan to sort of run rampant in China and do whatever, but also because they felt reward China enough for its sacrifices in World War I, and that ended up becoming the May the 4th movement, which just recently saw its 100th year anniversary, which is an important piece in Chinese history. Now, in here, in France, there were also Chinese students studying under the diligent work and frugal study movement, such as Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, who later on become very, very important leaders of the CCP. Obviously, you know, pretty well-known names. In this timeline, they're KMT members because the Chinese Communist Party is not a thing. Now, first-hand accounts of the Communist formative years written in the vernacular became highly influential to radical Chinese of all parties and tendencies. The exact takeaways by each eyewitness to the revolution varied, but a common subject was whether the syndicalism in practice was even applicable outside of the industrialized West, and if China had to develop a just society under their own conditions. This was important in the development of also Chinese Marxism in real life, because essentially Marxism and you know, socialism presupposes capitalist development as a basis to build socialism on top of that. So, you know, China, which was a country that was very agrarian and completely, you know, without lacking modern industry, wasn't really ready for the same kind of sort of subversive revolutionary activity as a country like Germany or Italy or even Russia. But Russia's just it's just a weird thing. Now the result of that is that Chinese sort of progressive as a whole thinkers graduate or sort of go more towards the nationalist and also agrarian aspects of revolutionary things. I don't really like this song, but whatever. Of revolutionary ideology. And, I mean, the end result of that is Maoism, but it's complicated, so we're not going to get that much into it. Now, due to the discipline required of its essentially insurrectionary program and the understandable distrust of personal warlord power bases, the KMT reformed its party and military structure to a much more centralized form modeled on other historical revolutionary parties, often referred to as the Dangguo, or party state. Now, this is pretty much the same as what happens in real life. What the Chinese nationalists become is very, very closely associated with, for example, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, Bolsheviks. While all decisions were made by essentially democratic means, once agreed upon by vote, the party's policies had to be obeyed by members to the letter, and that's democratic centralism. So essentially, you have a organic decision-making process, which can take many forms. In this case, vote. And then, or, you know, there could be Congress, there could be, you know, consultative committees, all that kind of stuff. And then, once the decision is taken, it has to be followed. This measure of unity allowed for the KMT to outmaneuver other factions in Guangzhou, Canton, politically and militarily, and to achieve full civilian and military control of most of the province. Now, Guangdong is this thing down here, and it used to be China's main sort of center of trade with the outside world alongside Shanghai. Now, Sun Yat-sen and later on other Chinese leaders, but that doesn't matter. When, like, struggles to develop and maintain a power base in North China fail, they generally try to fall back on the south. That's what Sun Yat-sen did. He couldn't take over Beijing, so he's like, okay, but like Canton and Shanghai are, well, along with Manchuria, but that's another question, are the most developed parts of China, so we're going to be stronger there and try to take over China from the south to the north. And that's why there was a northern expedition. And this happens in this timeline as well, and the KMT goes south. Okay, what happens then? Sun's Southern Nationalist government was not recognized by the Reichspakt, the British Empire, or the United States. However, in 1922, the Commune of France recognized the KMT both out of opposition to German domination of China and because of the leftward KMT in the leftward turn of the KMT towards socialist ideals. With help from Yunnan, which is this southwestern province, that had the most sort of quote-unquote progressive military officers out of all of China, the KMT secured Guangzhou and the rest of Guangdong province in 1923. Attempts to start the Northern Expedition, aka to start from southern China and march north with at the head of an army, a revolutionary army, to topple the Beijing regime and the northern warlords with it, proved to be fruitless, as due to the balance of power between all the various alliances, Sun Yat-sen just prevented the Zhili clique, which Zhili is another name for this province, Hebei, so essentially this area, from consolidating control. Then Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, just like in real life. Now, the official ideology is the three principles of the people. There's three of them. There's Minzu, Minquan, and Minsheng. Now, this progress report has a bunch of different translations from it. Now, basically, Minzu is nationalism, and no one really sort of disputes the translation there. It's basically just, China above the different ethnic groups and China above the foreigners, or the foreign imperialists, or whatever you want to call it. It's really a more independence form of nationalism, rather than like Great China nationalism. But there was a bit of Great China in there. For example, they did claim Mongolia as a part of China. And yeah, but whatever. That's just the whole thing. Minquan is democracy, literally the people's power. Min over here, this character that you see, that's why there's Min in all three of these names. It means the people. So yeah, it was heavily reliant on that. Some people also call Sun Yat-sen's ideology Chinese populism, because it was heavily influenced by another Russian ideology, which is Russian populism or narodism. Not directly, but it ended up being pretty much the same thing because of the similar conditions between China and Russia of relatively heavily underdeveloped countries, with, however, very sort of progressive and revolutionary intelligentsia and this kind of stuff. It's weird. So the Minquan, the democracy principle, literally the people's power, is literally not the same as the liberal democracy, despite the fact that it says so. I don't really agree, but it mostly just, envisions the construction of a democratic system with separation of powers in China to make sure that, there is a political pluralism in the country. Now, this sometimes gets involved with the question of a federalist China as well, but what Sun Yat-sen and the KMT envisioned was a centralized republic, where the democratic aspect would have to handle, all the divergencies and, diversity of China. Some others sympathetic to the KMT were against that and actually wanted a federation of China. And some of that talk persists to this day, but it's weird, and we're not going to get into it. Now, the Minsheng is the most controversial, as Mr. Who wrote this? Mr. Flamefang. Okay, so the lead developer of the China rework. As he writes, it is the most controversially defined of the three principles, and it's kind of vague. Minsheng literally means people's life, like this character over here, Sheng. Let's just zoom in it so you can... Oh, Jesus Christ. No, I didn't want to open this thing up. There we are. Minsheng, this character Sheng just means life. So, Minsheng is the people's livelihood, literally, or the people's welfare. Literally, the interpretation that, was dominant was pretty much welfare state. Some people, though, translate this as socialism, which I don't agree with. I would translate it as welfare state, because that's what Sun mostly had in mind, was that the state had to care for the livelihood of the people, thus welfare state, literally. And the implementation of that would have to be a land value tax as based on the economic theories of Henry George. Now, what the fuck is Henry George? George's economic theory? It's Georgism. Thank you. Basically, is that like above a certain sort of above a certain level of, or rather size of property, you have to tax the shit out of it, to sort of just very, 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 you know, oversimplify or whatever. They tax economic rent. Now, rent, what does that mean? It means that the farmer is, well, Jesus Christ, that's cancerous. That is extremely cancerous, holy crap. This music, anyway, there we go. Got the great Chinese music on. Now, basically, like, the dominant sort of form of proprietorship in the Chinese countryside was, okay, I own this land, right? I rent it out to peasants and they farm it for me, which is, you know, landlord and rentier, or not rentier, or rentee, I guess you could say, rent peasant, or whatever. Now, there were two main theories among Chinese reformist and revolutionary and, you know, just general progressive thinkers. Basically, one of them was, again, Georgism, so you just tax the shit out of, you know, productive land, and, you know, you try to make sure that through that way, at least, you can redistribute the wealth through the state to the people that are getting fucked at the lower rung of the ladder, essentially the peasant. Another theory was what sort of Mao Zedong and later on other, you know, land reform advocates would go for, which is redistribution. You know, gradually you go in and you take over first the big landlords, and then you redistribute that land to farmers, and sometimes you take it over for the state, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's basically that. Like, the need for land reform was a major drive towards support for these sort of radical parties. Now, Left Turn and the Northern Expedition. Conflict over the future of the Kuomintang started almost immediately after Sun Yat-sen's death. Despite the KMT's diplomatic courting of the Commune of France and other syndicalist Western nations, this was done more out of realpolitik than full ideological alignment, which is relatively similar to, in real life, the support of the Soviet Union and the alliance between the Guangdong regime and the Soviet Union. There was actually kind of, during the Northern Expedition, you know, in 1926 and 1927, there was this kind of weird parallel war between remnants of the Russian White movement that were, you know, that had taken refuge in China, and the, you know, Soviets that were supporting the Canton regime. So it was kind of like this weird thing, but yeah, don't have time to get into that. The moderate and right-wing factions that existed since the founding still had members in prominent position, and these figures were more than ready to reassert control over a party whose base was rapidly shifting towards radicalism. Now, after the death of Sun, a failed assassination attempt on the prominent pro-syndicalist KMT members, Yao Zhongkai, which is a really weird name. Let's see if, yeah, we get this man over here, who in real life died in 1925. Oh no. Led to the arrest and execution of Hu Hanmin and other several major KMT right-wingers. With the largest rival faction outside of the erratic Yunanese warlord Tang Jiyao eliminated, the civilian leadership was dominated by Liao and Wang Jingwei. We're gonna get to Wang Jingwei in a little bit, but let's get him. Here he is. Who was the most prominent in real life nationalist leftist in the KMT. Later on, he did kind of this weird horseshoe turn towards fascism and the Japanese, so he became even more right-wing than Chiang Kai-shek, and tried to collaborate with the Japanese to suppress the CCP, because he was against the United Front. Earlier on, the reason why he, disagreed with Chiang Kai-shek and then got sort of purged was because he was in favor of the United Front. So he does this kind of weird thing in real life, but in this one he doesn't, and he goes further down the leftist road in a way. Far more. Oh, sorry. Okay, so then in 1926, the Northern Expedition begins. Far more organized than the decimated warlord armies and trained by Red Russian and French forces. The National Revolutionary Army headed north, certain of victory and easily reached. Blah blah blah. But then they lost. So basically, because like honestly, if it was, if this was realistic and it didn't have to preserve the Qing and some warlords, the Northern Expedition in all likelihood should have succeeded. But since this is Kaiserreich and it needs to have the Qing in there because otherwise it would just be not Kaiserreich, they just kind of hand-wave it away and say that the Nationalists fuck up the Northern Expedition. Now, since they fuck up the Northern Expedition, it's bad for the KMT because they're in a precarious position in South China. They get divided between sort of different factions. The leaders of the NRA, the National Revolutionary Army's remnants, found refuge as guests of local leaders in Yunnan, Guangxi, or Guangdong province. Not anymore as like the leading members of the alliance, but now as, just sort of smaller groups, and they become partially integrated into local power structures of the southern cliques. Now, if you remember the southern warlords and the Yunnan progress supports, you know that they can take over actually and lead rightist, centrist, and one even leftist KMT faction with like military, military KMT of different alignments in the warlord cliques and try to reform the KMT from that. But the actual civilian apparatus of the KMT, though never formally split or expelled from the party, led by the Central Committee, the NRA armies have not taken any orders since the 1927, blah, blah, blah. They're pro-military. So a dedicated core of left KMT troops and the Central Committee retreated into the remote interior of southern Fujian, which are the guys that are shown off in the progress report that's just been released. No, not you. Not you, not you, not you. Oh, you're you. Where the hell is it? Where the fuck is it? Uprising. Right, should be this one. Oh yeah, right. I am an idiot. I already had it up. Basically this one. Now, this is relatively historical that they get, that they hide and make guerrilla warfare in this area. Now, if you take a look and we just compare and contrast these two images, you see that they're slightly west of Fuzhou. They're in Nanping and just north of Shantou, west of Xiamen. So it's this area, Longyan, Sanming, these things. Now, this area in real life, more to the west than to the east, but generally this area between Jhansi and Fujian was the primary base for something called the Jhansi Fujian Soviet, commonly referred to as the Jhansi Soviet. And if we have a map of that, which I sincerely doubt we're gonna find that easily, but hopefully, I don't know. That's not a map of the Jhansi Soviet, that's a map of Jhansi, which is different. There should be one out somewhere. I remember seeing a really good one. Fucking hell. Let's see if I switch. That is pretty cancerous. Oh, there we are. That looks pretty decent. So as you can see, it's got a lot of Jhansi, but it's also got a bit of Fujian, because this area is very, very mountainous. So it's suitable. You can see, like, from, let's just grab the satellite. You can see it's very, very suitable because of the rough terrain and such to guerrilla warfare. And it's also historically sort of a base for more anti-government forces. Nearby, also the Taiping Rebellion was based. It's just, you know, it's got this kind of historical sort of character. And they build what is called a revolutionary base, which in real life was a CPC thing, Chinese Communist thing. So basically, instead of us trying to take over a city and start an uprising from there and use that as our capital, we're going to have a sort of decentralized sort of commune, agrarian, free territory commune kind of thing, where we do control some like minor cities, but mostly it's about building up the forces in the countryside. If the enemies come and invade your base area, the forces in the countryside can just do guerrilla warfare, and you can just hold a few strong points and prevent the enemies from actually getting in and transporting supplies. Thus, they can't invade you even if your forces are much weaker. That's the gist of it, of Chinese guerrilla warfare. And then they established a core base region around Longyan that has been under effective KMT guerrilla control. Let's see what. Yeah, like guerrillas, since that point in time. Despite several disorganized attempts by the provincial governor Zhou Yinren to finally eradicate it, the Jhansi Fujian base region has survived unscathed. And if the left KMT ever return to an active military force, this is from where they will try to retake China. Now, in real life, this Jhansi Soviet thing was crushed by the organized, relatively, armies of Chiang Kai-shek coming from Nanjing, the Nanjing government, that sort of tried to crush this area in 5 campaigns called the encirclement campaigns, and the last one succeeded. It's controversial, and it resulted in the main Chinese Communist forces evacuating from this area, this Jhansi Fujian Soviet, and going on the long march all the way through western China into Sichuan, going up here, and then they went up here, here, and here's Yan'an. So they did this weird fucking insane, like 8,000 mile march, and eventually they came up here, which is where you see them in all Hearts of Iron games. But initially they had started here, and then they ended up, where the fuck is it? I forgot. Okay. And then they ended up here. So yeah, if you made an alt history that was like this, no one would believe you, but that's what happened in real life. Instead, since the opposition is much less organized in Kaiserreich, basically the revolutionaries are still in South China rather than in the Northwest. And elsewhere in China, the left KMT is an underground revolutionary party that is held together by hidden communication, blah, 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 the Central Committee is the leading organ, but there's a separate KMT organ called the Zhengtezhu Bureau that regularly interacts with cells that are mostly just like terrorists, criminals, these kinds of not good people, and recruits both party members and sympathizers for terror attacks against the League of Eight Provinces, which is in control of central/southern China. In the rework. Now, there's also people overseas, but we don't care. There's the, legation cities. We don't care. There was an uprising there. Whatever. Well, another reason why Fujian is an important place for this sort of leftist revolutionary thing in real life was the Fujian People's Government, which is this thing, which was a part of the KMT that, or the KMT armies that supported Second United Front, and so just try to, try to overthrow, I guess, or rebel against the Nanjing government, but they got destroyed because they didn't really collaborate that well with the Soviet, but whatever. That's another partially not important thing. We don't care about the United Front anymore. Now, there are a few factions in the KMT based on which of the 3 principles they emphasize the most. Now, there's the Minchuan, there's the Social Democrats, and they're led by Song Qinling, who was Sun Yat-sen's wife and widow, this waifu. And basically the cooperative revolution. Basically, these guys are populist. Then there's another of these factions of moderates, or sorry, of not of moderates, of Minchuan people, the moderates, and they're social liberal. These guys are social democrats, and in fact, the people that are involved in this faction, their real life equivalent, actually kind of exist today as well. Well, their political descendants, because these were the Kuomintang people that were in favor of again of the United Front and of the more sort of social reformist, social revolutionary aspects of nationalist Chinese ideology. Now, so yeah, there is a thing called the Revolutionary Committee of the Chinese Kuomintang, which is one of the 8 minority official parties in China, along with the CCP. Now, it's complicated and we're not going to get into it. And there's also the Chinese Peasants and Workers Democratic Party. Again, it's just complicated stuff, but these things exist in real life. That's why I'm showing this. After an early period of violence and skirmishes with the retreating NRA remnants in the late 1920s, the villages and town in Longyang County have been completely aligned with the KMT. And yeah, so like the insurgents is essentially an underground connection of allied towns and rebel cells composed of the stay-behind regiments of the leftist NRA after the German intervention. Rather than formally flying the Kuomintang standard or building a rebel government, the Jiangfu zone acts as a secret government of these remote areas, which is why it's sort of this revolutionary base kind of thing. Basically, it's their territory, but no one says it. Everyone knows it, but no one says it. And yeah, their main difference with the Minsheng, or the socialist faction, is economics. The Minchuan are more into Georgism, if I recall correctly. Where is it? Has a more hands-off approach to economic development compared to the Minsheng faction, and trusts the people in the areas of the government to organize themselves once it's clear that they understand and support KMT party ideology. The Minchuan proposed that regions such as Mongolia and Tibet be given more autonomy from the Han-dominated central government in order to better safeguard their national identities and rights within China. So, factions. I've got paint, because we all know that it's the best thing ever. How do you even... Alright, right. Give me... So there's... Jesus Christ, that's incredibly small. Man, paint is bad. Oh, bro. Can't even do this. Okay, so there's Minchuan left. Let's also give it the Chinese just to be coolio. Fucking hell. Of course, it's gonna take forever. Oh my god, you can't... Insane. This program is so bad. You can't have... Oh, what the fuck? Oh, whatever, who cares? Okay. Bad program. Then you have... Where? Okay. Then you have Minsheng. Radsock. Who are the people that spawn in revolt that we're going to take a look at in just a little bit. Then you have Minchuan, let's just call it center. Sokolib, social liberal. And then you have the Minsu, who are the right. Minsu meaning that they focus more on the nationalism, Minchuan more on the democracy, and Minsheng more on the welfare, we could say. The rump center, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the junior partner, the Syndicalists, the Chinese Syndicalist Party. Despite the existence of the CSP, the Chinese Syndicalist groups have not coalesced into a single party or even coordinate a national movement. This is very much opposed to, in real life, the CCP, and are instead organized as loose associations around each major urban centers. This is partly due to the Synditerns' priority of supporting the KMT as their favored faction due to the country's low industrialization, partly due to the more established KMT siphoning many of its potential members and talent. Now, in real life, this was... Oh, yo, hello. This was kind of a thing too, but not entirely. Oh, I like this one. This one has a bunch of great music, like this one. But later on, it gets weird. It just gets really, really weird later on. And, yeah, the CCP goes off and does its own thing. It's weird. Early cooperation between the CSP and KMT had formerly been established with the assistance of the syndicalist Italian and French governments, and few members they have are supporters of the KMT's plans for a free-stage national revolution. What does this mean? This means that the KMT envisions revolution in 3 stages. First one is military rule, which is meant so that you can take over warlords and let them collaborate, basically. And you have a sort of martial law. Then, once the warlords are not as strong and your civilian sort of apparatus is strong enough, you have something called the Party Tutelage, which is a one-party state led by the Nationalists, where only the Nationalists can rule. And then you have democracy, or multi-party system. Now, in real life, the KMT really only got the political tutelage under Chiang Kai-shek. So this whole free stage revolution never really got going. And it's worth noting that this was sort of cooked up by Sun Yat-sen rather than any of the later KMT figures. So yeah, it was just more of a generic roadmap. And some prominent members such as Chen Duxiu or Duxiu are members of both the KMT and the CSP. Now, Chen Duxiu is the guy who in real life founded the CCP, and later on he turned into a Trotskyist. There is still disagreement within the Central Committee over whether the urban syndicalist parties and movements should be given or can be trusted with the right to political assembly and independent of the KMT once the Republic's government is restored. So basically, they can't really do much of anything in terms of gameplay. That's the take from all of that. Then there is the Totalists, the Silent Giant, the Zhongtuju Bureau. In any clandestine organization, their groups in charge of security and espionage will gain some power of their own. The central spokes of the KMT's vast network of informants, spies, and party cells across southern China all converge, directly or indirectly, in the Shanghai Neutral Zone, where the mainland headquarters of the KMT's intelligence network lies. The Bureau for Intelligence and Special Methods, or Zhongtuju for short, is headed by Tai Chunfeng. This guy. A secretive former protege of Chiang Kai-shek, who volunteered to stay behind after the disaster of the Northern Expedition to help coordinate the KMT's underground operation. Now, it's worth noting that in this timeline, Chiang Kai-shek is actually, sort of a hero of the leftist KMTs because he died sort of defending Canton against the foreign intervention or whatever. So, yeah. He didn't get to sort of betray the KMT left and the CCP, which, leads into the collapse of the First United Front. While initially a minor project meant to keep some vital communications between cells going, Dai has turned the Zhongtuju agency into a rival to the Jiangfu zone in its strategic importance to the KMT. This is the primary method by which the KMT organized its more insurgent forms of operations, blah, blah, blah. Though not a formal political tendency, the committee has developed its own self-awareness as a political actor and has deep connections with the Minsheng faction. Many younger Chinese under the present conditions first interact with the KMT through the Zhongtuju. They are not an ideological in the regular sense of a party, but they share a mechanistic and technocratic approach to how they view political power and policies that is highly ruthless, and they're represented as totalists. So, Nazbols, basically. Now, the Minsheng, we saved them for last because it's important. The clearly dominant faction of the left KMT is the Minsheng, named after the social welfare principle of Sun Yat-sen's Free Principles of the People. Led by Wang Jingwei and the 4 elders of the KMT, they have close ties to the Commune of France, and the Central Committee is mostly made up of their members. Jesus Christ. Blah, blah, blah. Wang Jingwei fought, which is just, updating of the Free Principles of the People. Blah, 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 we don't care. Yeah, they're influenced by aspects of French Surrealism, Chinese anarchism, blah, 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 we don't care. So they think that the failure of the Northern Expedition was a lack of social revolution. The reason behind this idea is that the nationalist government failed to prove that its promises of democratic republicanism would actually bring any needed social changes to the masses of China. To win, reasoned the Minsheng, you need to gain the trust of the people and fully destruct the social and economic basis of old China in all its forms. Landlords, warlords, and monarchists. Now, old China and new China are another sort of important lingo for the Chinese political, development of the last century. Essentially, everyone from Sun Yat-sen to, today, says that puts a sort of, it's difficult to explain, puts a sort of split between an old China that has to be, sort of destroyed and replaced with a new China, a Xinzhongguo. Now, for the nationalists, this was the 1911 to 1927 period, the period of transition from old China to new China. For the Maoists, this was 1911 to 1949. For the current leadership of China, this goes pretty much until 1978, which is the beginning of reforms and opening, which is sort of the more current development of Chinese political theory, but it's complex, so we're not going to get into it. Just know that basically old China is represented as everything that is determining China's weakness in the last century of the Qing dynasty, the century of humiliation or whatever, and everything that needs to be discarded for the national rebirth, which is another sort of lingo that you hear a lot, especially if you follow the recent 70th anniversary of the PRC. They talked a lot about national rebirth, Fujian, the great rebirth of the Chinese nation, which has been a sort of article and generic objective of everyone since Sun Yat-sen to the current Chinese leadership in 2019. That is basically the idea that China needs to modernize while maintaining its national characteristics and become a strong world power. The Minsheng faction's proposed economic policies are highly top-down, while the KMT's one-party state will spearhead a mixed program of nationalizing key industries, establishing firm land rent taxes, and liquidating criminal and foreign enterprises. Socially, they wish to establish a national revolution under their rule that creates a new modernized and humanist Chinese culture that gets rid of the old patriarchal Confucian order. This is a just development of the new culture movement, which was an intellectual movement that, again, was to sort of destroy all old and regressive and reactionary forms of thought in China, and sort of introduce Western, more Western forms of thinking. They famously, wanted to introduce Mr. Science and Mr. Democracy, replacing Mr. Confucius. So basically, everything that has made the West strong, we want in China, and everything that has made China weak, we want out, basically. And this movement is very important to, sort of the development of not only Chinese arts and literature, but also political thought. These two policy planks combined are intended to work in tandem with military unification to disrupt the material and social basis for the warlords, while also creating a foundation for a unified nationalist China. So that's basically the introduction to today's main event, which is the left KMT and what they can do with China. Now, Wang Jingwei is the leader, as we can see, and if we take a look at their starting screen, you can see that he is there. He is supposed to be a radical socialist, and basically the other factions that are in there are the Social Democrats, the Minchuan Populists, and the Social Liberals, the Minchuan Moderates, and then there's also the intelligence people, the Totalists, the Zhongzhiju. And you see a nice little description, a few terrible modifiers just for, the fuck you aspect of it. Because that's just amazing, is it? And you're an insurgent army, so you get a bunch of bonuses. And as they transition back into a conventional mass army, the national ideas will dissipate. You have low popular support, but you can deal with that through the focus tree. You're in Fujian and you have a few units. Basically, you start there, but you need to expand quickly. Because what happens is you don't start on the map as they're restricted to their secretive bases. However, once the collapse of the League of Eight Provinces happen, you can rise up and go play as them. On top of Nanjing, you also have other threats like Anqing or Zhongchang Tianran-led Shandong, which you will be brought into conflict with. To help you in your struggle, you have a myriad of decisions to raise local forces as well as seize land through missions. So basically, you have your mobilizations everywhere, mobilize NRA units, recall Xue Yue and Zhang Fakui, who are important commanders. It looks like they're in India, because that definitely looks like Barafia Commune's flag. And then get access to the sea, secure Fujian province, and secure Gannan prefecture. I'm guessing that if you complete these missions quickly enough, you get some good bonuses. Then there is the focus tree. This is the sort of social and expansion part, the Jiangfu base government. So you have a left side that's more about the economic reforms. Then in the center is more about sort of dealing with foreign capital and the birth of the industry. Then you have the expansion route to unify at least central and southern China under your control. Legal code section isn't unlocked until you have secured your position in the southeast, but that area of the tree will provide you with some choices to make regarding land distribution and opium. They will help you integrate China better. So basically, you can either go full towards the expropriation, as in real life the Maoists eventually ended up doing, or put caps to land rent. So essentially, you can't rent peasants above a certain amount. You can't fuck them over too much. And then you can either just completely prohibit opium or tax the opium. Opium is too complicated a subject to get into, so we're not. Just know that it's a problem. It's there. It's a source of revenue for a lot of people. Not that much in Fujian, especially like in this belt. If you can see my cursor, I'm not sure, but essentially Sichuan, Yunnan, Shanxi, and Shanxi are the areas where in China you grow the most opium. A bit Guizhou as well. But yeah, that's basically an important source of income for the farmers and the governments there because they tax the shit out of it. Usually under weird euphemisms because opium is supposed to be banned. So they called it like special product fees or shit like that. It's actually kind of an interesting subject, but we don't have time to get into it again. Yeah, okay, so next part is something you can do, will provide you with many ways to gain equipment, which you will need. You may anger other countries, but it is vital to ensure the revolution survives. So what he's talking about is seizing German capital, consolidating control, all that kind of stuff. So basically, you're sort of mobilizing resources to help the national revolution. That's the army section. Finally, in this part of the tree, you have the ability to help out the KMT in other warlords, and if the KMT on the left come out on top, they will be lower to in the struggle for China. This section also has room to expand into the rest of southern China, bolstering your power base. So this is support a KMT in Hunan, Liangguang, Sichuan, and Yunnan. Sichuan and Yunnan, you don't really get involved with too much, but yeah. And then unite southern China, and then there is the western expedition. From the shape of that place, that looks like Sichuan, and it would make sense if you take a look at how Sichuan is shaped, sort of like this. It kind of looks the same, but whatever. And it would also make the most sense because western expedition really means Sichuan. In China, like the west of China is really Sichuan, which is this province over here. If we, yeah, can highlight it. This, whenever someone refers to Western China, they're mostly just referring to Sichuan. And yeah, then there's the army. Army reform, which you can either prioritize modernization or manpower. You've seen this a million times. There's also the Dare to Die Corps, which was a historical thing. Like, you know, we're gonna have essentially almost suicidal units on our side. And then there's even a way to provoke your natural enemy through the Navy and the Air Force. Provoking our natural enemy means go forth and reclaim Taiwan, which might or might not have been a slogan for like the Chinese communists after 1949. I don't remember and I didn't look it up, which is my bad, but I think something like it was around. When your enemies are dealt with, so I'm not sure, maybe like, see, this is before you do national reunification. If we took a look at the full tree, Jesus Christ. If you take a look at the full tree, there we are. If you take a look at the full tree, which unfortunately is in like really terrible quality, but whatever. There is over here War of Anti-Imperialism, and that's when it deals with the Northeast. So the go forth and reclaim Taiwan over here to the right. Special Methods Division, Sanmin Political Commissars. It kind of sounds like you're trying to make like a kind of uprising there, but who knows? And it would make sense because I doubt you're ever going to have a strong enough navy to take on the Japanese navy, but okay. So here we go. When your enemies are dealt with, you will start the first repatriated Congress of the KMT, which has you literally build up a country from the ground up with a wealth of events that can choose the course of your nation. So this is the first repatriated Congress of the KMT, and in the full focus tree, it is, where is it? Over here. Yes, that is after you have taken control of the Central China Railroad, and I'm guessing when you've finished most of this focus tree, and when you've taken over at least the League of 8 provinces. And so you control essentially the southern half of China, basically. These events will unlock focuses as well as changing rewards for other focuses. You will also have a choice to change your leader depending on what faction takes control. There are a few paths to pick, like having free elections or more dangerous paths with the Zhongteju, which is Dai's coup. Now, if you take a look at the full tree, you can see that when you proclaim the new republic, you have a couple of sort of options over here. Either ethnic autonomous regions, as we said, the populists, so the sort of center-left, we're going to call it, even though it's really left, want to do, or unitary government, like the far left want to do. Recognized urban syndicalists, or the All-China National Labor Syndicate, which is a bit like the All-China Federation of Trade Unions, which is something that in real life the CCP sort of has as a state trade union, really. It's like, yeah, basically just a fake trade union. And looks like you can set that up as well for your syndicalist China if you go for Dai's coup, which is going to be totalist China. Now, the totalist China, again, it's not really socialist. It's just Nazbol. Basically, it's like, it's got the same political affiliation as far as it looks as the radical socialist KMT, but then it leads into autarky, which is historically what the Maoists try to do. So it's a bit like the Maoists with the nationalist flag and more military government and more secret police. So it's a weird mix between fascism, Stalin, and Mao. Yeah, sounds great. And then they also have the New Life movement, which is, as I already explained, something that in real life Chiang Kai-shek went into to promote Neo Confucianism. And sort of the revival of traditional Chinese values into, modern features, the four virtues of Confucianism, and they were propped up by the Blue Shirt Society and the CC clique, which, like the Blue Shirt Society have been called the Chinese fascists also, and they were also kind of like this secretive ultra-nationalists, really important in the KMT intelligence. So this is really the sort of the inspiration, I believe, for the Zhengtaju. Just that instead of being influenced by, fascism and Chiang Kai-shek's later ideology, they're influenced by Wang Jingwei's more left-wing, more actually left-wing principles. I don't know. If I can CC click. Yeah, basically that's that. Whereas, and yeah, the other things are the continued tutelage, which is, continuing the one-party state, or local democratic government, which leads into the first national election. I wonder if the KMT can lose the election. There's also a thing called the Consultative Conference, which you can choose as both with the tutelage and the democratic government. Now, the Consultative Conference is also something that exists in real life in the People's Republic of China. Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, not members, I don't care, I just want to look at this thing, which is the organ through which the United Front works. Now, the United Front in real life is the CCP plus all their little puppet parties, of whom I showed two earlier on. The remnants of the left KMT and the Chinese Workers and Peasants Social Party, or whatever. And through this conference is a bit like China's parliament, if China had a parliament. It's close to an advisory upper house, they're called here. And yeah, the CCP has 2/3 of the seats, while the other ones are drawn from the United Front parties allied with the CPC. So while China is governed by a one-party state, it isn't technically a one-party state, because the Consultative Conference allows these minority parties to have a say. And that's kind of what you're going for there. And you can also deepen the party state. If you have gone for the New Life movement, you go for autarky as well. Again, self-sufficiency, which is not a good idea in real life. That was called the Great Leap Forward and the Great Famine. So, yeah, probably not going to have good results in the end. And yeah, dice coup. Now, if you manage to come out with... so, at some point you will have to venture north and face whoever controls Beijing for the control of China. The Second Northern Expedition. Yeah, basically, if you manage to come out victorious after a long series of engagements, you can finally try to end the period of warlords and secure other areas of China you haven't got yet and bring them under Republican rule. This section will be mainly accessed later on in the game, and so there will be few options open to the player to allow them to expand outside of China. The final area of the tree has you focusing with the foreign powers in a world that has completely changed since you first rose up. So basically, the Northern Expedition, the Second Northern Expedition, first you kill the Qing in Beijing, and then you have to deal with Feng Tian clique. They're claiming to be a successor to the Beiyang Republic, which is the republic that was mostly warlord dominated. Not really the nationalist preferred republic, so you can either negotiate with them, and presumably depends on a bunch of things, or cross the Dai River, aka attack into Manchuria, and that turns into war of anti-imperialism, so a war with Japan. Now, if we take a look at the full focus tree, that is out here, and that leads down to the fate of the legations, which also requires reintegrate northern China. So after you've taken over the warlord regime, you can do these things. go to the northwest and deal with the Islamics or Mongolia, retake Outer Mongolia, so deal with Sternberg, neutralize the Russians. I'm not sure what that's going to involve, but neutralize the Russians. Restore sovereignty over Tibet, because Tibet is not a real country, as we just said, or as we know. And then with foreign policy, you can either repay the Syndicalists or go pivot towards Washington and form the East Asia National League. Hello, 1984 reference. East Asia. So basically repay the Syndicalists. I'm not sure if you're required to be a certain faction. If, like, for example, the social liberals cannot join the Internationale, but it looks like join the Internationale. Intervene in Annam. Annam is Vietnam. It's the way some Chinese called Vietnam. It's from Annan, which means the pacified South. It's actually not the greatest name to call Vietnam, because it's kind of equivalent to calling, like, Canada the United States' 51st state. I'm gonna use that reference, which is not entirely appropriate, but yeah, kind of like that. It's just implying that the Chinese have to go in there and, you know, secure Vietnam from, like, the Vietnamese and whoever else, but whatever. Liberate South Asia, which I'm guessing is going to give you a bunch of decisions to invade a bunch of people. And then if you've chosen to join the Syndicalists, you can take mission to Red India. If you have restored sovereignty over Tibet, you can choose to renounce the Mcmahan Lines. Now, the Mcmahan Lines, I believe, is the border agreement between the British and the Chinese, between British India and China. So I'm guessing renounce the Mcmahan Lines is supposed to, like, restart border skirmishes between India and China, and maybe it can escalate into a full-on war. So obviously that's going to be kind of not conclusive to, you know, helping out Red India or whatever, because you're invading India, kind of. In real life, that leads to the Sino-Indian War of 1962? Yeah, okay, I didn't remember the exact year, but I knew it was in the 60s. Yeah, all this stuff. Now, if you manage to come out victorious after a long series of engagement, you can do all do stuff, okay? If you thought that this was over, however, you may not know, but as Liang Wang, you will be able to get the left KMT in power. I mention this because there is actually another tree which will replace the first area of the original KMT tree that I showed, so this one. So this is with Chen Mingshu victorious in Liangwang, Guangdong. So you're not starting off as a, you know, underground rebellion, but you're starting off as a warlord province that converts to KMT, basically. So it's slightly different, but then you get the revolution secured and it goes down to the normal KMT tree. There's plenty more to experience on your own, so I won't show the rest. Rest assured, if you play the left Kuomintang, you will be in for a treat. This is all for this week, but here's the full tree, and that's what we're looking at. So that's Chen Mingshu, right? Is this one? Yeah, that's the same one. So basically, let's take a look at the tree as a whole. There is a little bit more on the left-hand side as well that we didn't take a look at. Basically, yeah, here we are. Basically, there's also the Revive China program. Again, with the Revive, you know, revitalization, all this stuff. They just really, really love this word. In fact, one of the, like, revolutionary organizations of Sun Yat-sen was called the Revive China Society. And this one is the more economic programs after reunification. You found the Academia Sinica, which was also founded in real life to be the sort of central, again, like, university or whatever of Nationalist China. I believe it still exists on Taiwan. Then there's Bo Po Mo Fo. That's referencing something, but I don't remember, so I don't know. You'll have to look it up yourself. Foreign research, national culture movement, choose the Republican capital. I'm guessing you can choose either Nanjing or Canton, maybe even Beijing. Who knows? And then you can build the National Museum. I love how there's a Chiang Kai-shek over there. Now, in real life, the National Mausoleum is dedicated to Sun Yat-sen. I'm not sure when it was built, though. Yat-sen Mausoleum. It's basically near Nanjing in southern China. Well, central China. It was built when? In 1929. So, okay, so since the KMT did not take over IRL, this thing didn't get built. So now you can build it, but you build it for Chiang Kai-shek, which is kind of hilarious because you're left KMT, and in real life he killed all the left KMT, but it's just kind of one of those old Kaiserreich switcheroos. There's National Reconstruction Commission, you have some industrialization. Yeah, basically that. Is there anything else particularly interesting over here? Doesn't look like it. Anything else that I need to talk about? Oh yeah, right. The Lower Yangtze offensive. There's a couple of important things to talk about over here. So here, prepare the Lower Yangtze offensive over here. You can see that the icon says Nanjing. That's the Chinese characters over here in this thing. So that's you taking over Nanjing. Then there's reorganized nationalist cells and handle the millenarians. Now the millenarians are the Shandong clique, or at least parts of the Shandong clique. It's the Shangqing guys, the weird sort of semi-Buddhist, semi-Taoist, crazy people. Now millenarians just means that they're just this kind of religious sect that wants to sort of bring about apocalypse because they believe that the apocalypse will result in like the great hero rising up and defeating evil and, paradise on earth. So yeah, those people are fucking insane, but whatever. And then there's also liaison with DVQDD rebels, which is hilarious because DVQDD are the Vietnamese nationalists, modeled on the Chinese nationalists, so the Dai Viet Quoc Dang Dang, which sounds a bit like, Zhonghua Guomin Dang, does it? Because it's literally like the same words. Why is there no Chinese fucking characters? Let's see. Yeah, you can see that like the Chinese characters over here, literally Da Yue Guoming Dang. It's literally the same name, just in a different language. Nation Party, the Nationalist Party. And this is a party that existed in real life of like Vietnamese nationalists that got a big hard-on, first from Sun Yat-sen and after that from, Chiang Kai-shek. And the Chinese nationalists tried to prop them up because at one point they invaded North Vietnam because the French couldn't hold it. It's complicated, weird. Oh god, but whatever. You can support these guys as the left KMT. So I'm guessing you can help essentially the Indo-Chinese Federation, and if the Social Democrats are in charge, because the Vietnamese Nationalist Party can take over the Indo-Chinese Federation, which is Ho Chi Minh, basically, even though Ho Chi Minh is dead. So the Viet Cong, then maybe you can like be nationalist buddies with them and make like the East Asia National League, I'm guessing, relies heavily on radical socialist revolution in Vietnam, but whatever. Is there anything else that's very important? No, I don't think so. Basically, whenever the China Rework releases public service announcement, this is the faction that I'll be playing first, I believe, because yeah, and if I don't play it first, it's because I want to get a feel for the China Rework playing someone else first, but I'm feeling this one first. I want to reunite China as the KMT. So basically, yeah, I want to thank y'all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. How long was this? Holy shit, it was too long. 1:15. It could have been worse. So yeah, I'll see you soon, and hope you had a good day. And this is the fucking anthem of nationalist China, recorded in a toaster a million years ago. So yeah, see you guys soon.